Good Saturday morning for everyone in Houston. It is a beautiful day outside, a beautiful day for us to again board our Freedom Tour bus and wrap up our final day of the experience. I know I saw someone in the chat, maybe Helena, say it was so good to see so many familiar faces, and that is very true. We are so excited to have everyone that has been with us all week, to have you back here this morning with us to again educate and engage with us in our learning and unlearning of systemic racism. So welcome everyone to our Freedom Tour, our final day of our experience. We will kick it off with Sherry this morning. I'm sorry, with the video today.
Structural, institutional, and systemic racism broadly refer to the system of structures that have procedures or processes that disadvantage racial minorities, and particularly Black people. It refers to the rules, practices, and customs once rooted in law with residual effects that reverberate throughout society, each with their own nuances. A good example of systemic racism is redlining, a system once used by banks and the real estate industry that literally outlined the neighborhoods where people of color lived in red ink. If you lived inside of the red lines, loans were considered risky and banks were less likely to give loans or even invest. The practice was banned in 1968, but the impacts live on, preventing Black families from amassing wealth at the same rate as their white neighbors on the other side of that red line. Need proof? According to the Federal Reserve, the net worth of a typical white family is $171,000. That's 10 times greater than that of a Black family. Homes in Black neighborhoods are generally and historically worth less than white homes because the developers and businesses that make a neighborhood, well, a neighborhood, are less likely to be there. That means the tax base is lower too, which has a trickle-down effect. Less tax dollars for schools means fewer kindergarten classes, fewer qualified teachers, fewer AP classes. That leads to lower graduation rates from high school and even fewer graduates from college. This is in part caused by the school-to-prison pipeline that disproportionately impacts people of color. Institutional racism is more narrowly defined as the overt and covert forces blocking people of color from accessing the same opportunities as white people. Many of these children may benefit from additional educational and counseling services. Instead of getting the help they need, they're isolated, punished, or incarcerated. Once you have a criminal record, it invades all aspects of your life. Getting everything from a job to an apartment becomes that more difficult. Many people believe their communities are over-policed, presumed to be overly dangerous. But consider this. Black and brown people account for 30% of the U.S. population, but account for 43% of people killed by police and more than half of the incarcerated population. Institutional racism goes beyond just serving time. Something as simple as hair can be used to discriminate. Rules at school and the workplace that don't allow for dreadlocks, cornrows, and braids, they discriminate and don't take into consideration hair texture and singles out people based on their physical traits, creating rules where rules aren't needed, rules that control people of color. So, who gets to make all of these rules in society? Since America was colonized, it's been white people who've made these rules. First with slavery, then Jim Crow laws, and separate but equal rules, and even creating limits on who can immigrate into the country. The term given to define that power, white privilege. It refers to whites' historical and contemporary advantages in access to quality education, decent jobs, a livable wage, home ownership, retirement benefits, and wealth, regardless of socioeconomic status.
All right, good morning again, and thank you so much for joining us for our final day of our virtual Freedom Tour experience. Today, we continue our journey. This may be the last day of our virtual Freedom Tour, but our work is just now beginning. As we become educated and engaged, we can't just ride the bus every day. Doing personal work to understand systemic racism is necessary, yet it is not sufficient. We must acknowledge that racism exists and get involved in fighting it every day.
When I'm up here on stage, they call me Brandon. When I'm with my homies, they call me B, and when I'm with the ladies, let's just say they call me Taken because I'm already happily spoken for. But when I'm back at home, my mama, she called me Pookie. And though I'm not afraid to admit it, my mother calls me Pookie at like the most inopportune moments. For instance, today, on my way here to America's Got Talent, my mom screamed out the front door, "Make sure that you call me when you get there." Pookie. And like, I get why my mother says it out of courtesy, but to be real, I don't understand why my mom's so concerned with my safety, praying for me as I leave the house on a daily, because I'm just a young man who has faith in Jesus. The same way that stars have faith that space will protect them from this galactic bully we call gravity, who longs to turn their stardust splendid spectacle for passerbyers to watch in awe of its depth. So yes, I never really understood the issue. And then I went on Facebook, and I realized that my mama loved me the same way every mother loved their son, fearfully. Because normally, death don't really bother me. I mean, I'm from Southside Stockton. I'm all too familiar with how some family reunions only ever take place on graveyard grass, and how a hole can be a safe haven for a soul in this mortal game of hide and go seek. But there is something so different about Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Jacob Blake, and the countless others. And as I stared at that screen, I couldn't help but think I was looking at a mirror image of myself being choked out for merely existing, or for daring to be more than 3/5 of what them folk thought them to be. Or maybe it was simply due to their hue, and in that moment I better understood my black mother's greatest fear was every time I leave her home, on the other side of my phone will no longer be her son, will be America's next most popular hashtag, accompanied by a video of her young star being gunned down by gravity as my stardust has turned splendid spectacle for passerbyers to watch in awe of my death. So yes, my mother's greatest fear is that I won't return home breathing, blood pulsing through these veins enough to still be her Pookie. And my mama warned me, "Son, don't you dare get caught at the wrong place at the wrong time with that wrong colored skin, because those 3 strikes, they lead to pine box convictions, and I need you to return home my Pookie again." So dear Mom, I promise you this, I will do everything in my power to make it back home to you. But if I don't, just know you was the very last thing on my mind. And I will always, always be your Pookie.
All right, if you'd like to subscribe and see more, click below.
I'm not sure if you all have seen that video before. Certainly if this is the first time that you have watched it, it may bring up some feelings for you. I want to invite us all to just take a moment to reflect again on why we're here today, why we are committing to having these types of conversations and coming together. Take a moment, and I invite you to share any feelings, any reflections in the chat. We're here as a community today. Thank you. When we talk about unlearning and undoing racism, we're not only talking about dismantling the systems, but we're talking about saving lives, saving spirits, preserving hope. And so it's my pleasure to introduce to you Jenny Stevens, who is going to be the trip lead for the next portion of our Freedom Tour today. Jenny.
Thank you, Sherry. Good morning. Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. I'm going to introduce Restoring Justice. Restoring Justice was founded in 2016. Restoring Justice is a 501c3 nonprofit organization in Houston, Texas, that provides holistic and client-centered representation to marginalized members of our community facing criminal charges. Their mission is to end mass incarceration one client and heart at a time. Carl Nix is Restoring Justice's bail coordinator. He oversees operations of the bail fund, which financially aids the incarcerated with the ability to post bonds. For Carl, not allowing people's financial resources to determine their freedom is the most rewarding part of the role. Restoring Justice's goal to provide holistic defense to the overlooked of our justice system motivated Carl's decision to join the organization. Prior to his time at Restoring Justice, Carl spent time working at local radio stations, managing local musicians, and working on several political campaigns. Outside of the office, Carl enjoys bike riding, hiking, and traveling. If Carl had to choose one song, it'd be One Love by Bob Marley. Welcome, Carl.
First and foremost, I would like to start off by saying thank you to the YMCA for allowing us to share our vision and give some insight about the criminal justice system as it relates to bail. I would also like to thank all of you who took time out of your Saturdays to come and learn about a system that is impacting millions on a daily basis. Now, the bail system kind of relates to the game of Monopoly, where if you go to jail, all you have to do is play your get out of jail free card and you're released from custody. The only difference is in real life, if you want to get released from jail, you have to pay bail. Now, there are many individuals impacted on a daily basis. Now, seeing those facts and figures written down on a piece of paper is one thing. However, hearing them is a totally different situation. So I think it would be beneficial for us to hear from a few individuals whose lives have been impacted and changed forever by the bail system. Can we please play the clip?
I've been in jail for 350 days.
2 years and 2 months.
1 year and 8 months. I've been incarcerated in Harris County for almost 2 years now.
Todavía no me dicen fecha de juicio.
Everything that I had is gone.
But I've lost my apartment, I've lost my car,
job.
I've lost contact with my children. Todo, perdí todo, o sea, toda mi familia. No poder verlos, abrazarlos. There's so many people here that are just forgotten about. It's like unreal.
They gave me a $65,000 bond. $10,000.
My bond is set at $100,000. $100,000.
For just this possession charge?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't have $10,000 to pay them. I don't have the bond money.
I've never been a violent offender. I've never ever had a violent offense in my life. It's just I was sex trafficked when I was young, and I just don't really know any other way.
It's just a scary situation to be in, to be helpless with somebody else controlling your life.
A federal
class action lawsuit claims the system is unconstitutional.
The system kept people accused of low-level, often non-violent offenses in jail because they couldn't afford bond.
I mean, under the Eighth Amendment, it's clearly not constitutional. You shouldn't have excessive bails and fines. Even under the Texas Constitution, it's not constitutional. By due course of law, excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed. I don't know, I find it to be so simple that it just, it's kind of, it actually just says what it means, that you shouldn't have excessive bails or fines. If they can't afford it, then obviously it's excessive. The bonds are set by the judges. Good morning, everyone. In a moment, I'm going to call the doctor. We're supposed to have a system where there's a presumption of innocence. If you don't presume someone to be innocent and you basically already in your mind have found them to be guilty, I think some people have a habit of punishing them with this high, hefty bond that they can't afford.
So they're using the bond amount to punish.
I think some people use a bond amount to punish, yes.
Is that constitutional?
No. There's a lot of people in there that have like a $10,000 bond that they haven't been able to afford. You sit in jail long enough and someone gives you a plea deal, you just take it because you're ready to just move on with your life.
None of the facts have been discussed with me over my case. It's just plead guilty, no plead guilty, just reset.
The lawyer comes out, he just handles the reset paper.
9 times out of 10, the court date's just going to be reset.
Resets, go to court, don't see him, reset.
And there's nothing we can do about it.
Sometimes you might go and your lawyer won't even show up.
He's never there. You know, it's always a reason why he didn't show up, so.
And he's like, all right, you don't want to take the offer? We're going to get a reset, 90 days.
I just got frustrated with that, and I just said, man, I'd rather just, what's the best y'all can do, and I just signed for something.
It makes me feel like they're playing a game with us. Like, it's either you're going to take the time or you're going to sit here and wait.
Why are judges setting these excessive bail amounts?
It's just a culture that's been passed down from generation to generation, sadly, to just lock people up and set high bonds. It reminds me of like, I hate to say it this way, but like an old school lynching. Like, we don't have a lot of evidence, go get the rope, let's hang them by a tree. It's just proliferated into something new. There's, different people in the jail than what is on the bench. Most people, they're sitting on the benches, they make 6 figures, they live in nice homes, they have health insurance. Most people in jail, they may not have health care, they may not live in the same communities. You have to care about people in this profession too, and I think it's easy to vilify people and, just send them down the road, send them to prison. I think it's harder to take time out of your day to make sure you're releasing more people on conditions so they can have freedom and liberty just like you. But you have to care. If you don't care, you just don't care.
And be honest, I just feel like it's just not a fair system. The bonds are excessive. You pay these lawyers, they show up when they want to.
Getting to the point you don't even care anymore. That they gonna keep me here as long as they want to.
Everything's like based on money here. I'm with someone and they commit a crime and I go to jail with them and they have money, they can get out, but I can't. Even if I didn't commit the crime, even if I was just with someone. You have money in here, you're fine. You don't have, down from the commissary to anything. If you have money, you're good. If you don't have money, then you're just gonna sit in here.
Now that we have witnessed the impact that the bail system has had on a few individuals, I feel it would be the proper time to learn how their fears were turned into a reality. I would like for the attendees to place themselves in this scenario. If you could, after getting arrested, you are placed in a room by yourself. You are being accused of a crime that you are legally innocent of. Your attorney walks in and start throwing all these different terms at you all at once. How do you think you would react? Because as we know, in reality, this is exactly how it leaves someone feeling who was accused of a crime. They are often left extremely confused and very afraid for what's to come. So you ask, how could we possibly make this a little bit less intimidating? Next slide, please. You can go to the next one. So I think the best way to start would be to look at what a typical case looks like. Keep in mind, all cases are not created equal. They can vary in duration and steps. So this is what a typical case looks like. Although there are 9 steps, we'll only be focusing on step 1 and step 2 today, which is arrest and bail. Next slide, please. Now, here are a few common situations that may lead to someone getting arrested. For example, an officer observes you putting a candy bar in your pocket, or a store clerk calls the police and states that you stole a candy bar. The officer arrives and sees the candy bar hanging out your pocket. You can get arrested that way, or another common way is the store, another other way that arrest warrant could be put out for your arrest if there's probable cause and somebody calls the cops. Next slide, please. After being arrested, you'll be booked and you'll be read your Miranda rights. Now, some may state there is no way thousands are getting arrested. And if thousands are getting arrested, it's not as often that it's displayed in the media. Well, I'll let you be the judge of that. Did you know, based on a report from The Intercept, that over 10 million people have been arrested up until 2016? That's one person every 3 seconds. Out of those 10 million, only 5% were violent arrests or violent offenses, while the other 80% were non-violent offenses. Just think about that for a moment. 5% were violent. 80% of the offenses were considered non-violent. I would like to show you what could happen when someone is arrested for a non-violent offense, but the offense is treated as if it were violent. Please play the clip.
We turn now to another tragic story about a young man who learned the hard way about the troubles plaguing America's criminal justice system. Khalif Browner was arrested at 16, never convicted of a crime, never had a trial. but spent more than 3 years in one of the most violent jails in the country. Tonight, here is Khalif in his own words.
You're supposed to be innocent to prove guilty, but the way the system is you're guilty to prove innocent.
Little did we know Khalif Browner was already dying inside the day we met him. At the easy age of 22, he'd already learned more about America's criminal justice system and endured more than any soul should ever have to. That's Khalif there on the floor inside Rikers Island, New York City's most notorious jail, beaten by a gang of fellow inmates, all caught on camera. At the age of 16, he was arrested and sent here for allegedly stealing a backpack.
It was like hell on earth. We were beaten, stomped by the correction officers, and they was just beating on me.
Beatings captured on surveillance video obtained by the New Yorker magazine, which first brought Khalif's story to light. In this video, we see him being escorted to the prison shower. He appears to speak to the guard, who in seconds is seen slamming him into a wall and then to the ground.
And I cried myself to sleep because it's like, I want to go home, and it's like they're not letting me go home.
To go home, Khalif's mother, Benita Browner, needed to post bail of $3,000. Money, she said, she just didn't have.
What was your reaction when you heard that your 16-year-old boy was being sent to Rikers Island?
My heart dropped. You know, I had heard so many horror stories about Rikers, and all I could picture was him getting hurt in there.
Court records show Khalif had attempted suicide at least 6 times, spent 1,110 days behind bars, more than 800 of those in solitary confinement. His court date postponed more than 30 times. He endured all this having never been given a trial, never convicted of a crime. Finally, in June of 2013, all charges against Khalif were dismissed. But his experience exposed a troubled criminal justice system and the brutality of life behind bars.
I think at some point, almost a reckless disregard by the prosecutors in this case. They didn't care, Byron. They saw his file. They saw that he was in jail. And he'd probably take a plea, and they were hoping he'd take a plea.
The judge told me that if I plead guilty, I would be released from jail that same day. But I didn't do it. You're not going to make me say I did something just so I could go home.
Now, I know that that was extremely hard to watch for some of us. But in reality, this is what some individuals go through. This is just the world that we live in as of right now. So how do you suppose that we fix this problem? Well, one of the possible ways to prevent this from possibly happening would be to have a better understanding of what bail is, how bail works, and why it was originally created. Next clip, please. So, what is bail? Bail is the amount of money the defendant must post in order to be released from custody until trial. However, not all bail involves cash. Next clip, please. So how does it work? Typically, when you are arrested, you're either granted bail or your bail will be denied and you will be required to remain in custody. Now, if you are granted bail, you will be given a few options depending on your state, depending on the state in which you are arrested. For instance, if you are arrested in a state other than Texas, you may be granted a PR bond or a personal reconnaissance bond, which only requires you to promise to show back up to court. And if you agree, you'll be set free. However, that bond is not required, that bond is not available in Texas. Oh, you already went to the next one, okay. So, some other, you skipped ahead a little bit. I'll catch up. So some other conditions are non-monetary values. Non-monetary bonds. And they could include reporting to pretrial services. Yeah, you can go to the next clip. It could include reporting pretrial services, checking in periodically, or attending a drug treatment program, or a work release. Now, the non-monetary conditions of bail include a personal bond, which is similar to a PR bond. The only major difference, is if you fail to appear, that bond, whatever the amount that the bond is set, you will be required to pay it. So you are given two options. No, I'm sorry. So we can skip ahead. Yeah, you're in the right spot. So we can go to the monetary conditions of the bail. And you will be given two of those options. You can either pay the entire amount in cash, or you can pay 10%, which is a non-refundable bail amount that's typically paid to a bail bondman. If you decide to take a fully secured cash option, the total amount of money paid will be returned upon you satisfying all the conditions set by the court, minus court fees, of course. But if you decide to pay a surety, which is a bail bondman, typically we'll pay them 10%, and the bail bondman would keep that 10% as a fee in order to guarantee that your loved one would show back up to court. You can go to the next slide, please. So now that you know the ins and outs of bail and how it works overall, let's dive deeper into how bail is conducted within the Harris County area. In Harris County, the felony judges use a tool called the felony bail schedule. So the process usually goes as follows. You are arrested, then your bail is set using the felony bail schedule. Now, the pros of the felony bail schedule, it provides efficiency and uniformity. Next slide, please. Here's an example of a felony bail schedule and what it looks like. In a hypothetical situation, the judge would consider your offense level along with your public safety assessment or risk assessment score to determine what your predetermined bond amount should be. Now, sometimes the judges may elect to impose a higher bond based on your criminal history. Next slide, please. But if you or your family member are going to pay money out of their pocket, at least you should know where it's going and why you're doing it. So the question comes into account, why money bail? Well, bail was originally put in place to incentivize that the individual will return back to court. Next slide, please. Now, to some, they might be glad to receive a bail so low. However, others are stuck staring at the bars within the detention center because although felony bail schedules may be uniform, they're not individualized. And this is a huge downside. So in actuality, next slide, please. The money bail system is criminalizing poverty. In other words, if you're too poor, You're trapped in jail, just sitting there with no hope to even get out unless somebody somebody pays bail for you, which if it's not your family, possibly a friend, possibly a stranger. But some people are sitting there with no hope, no prayer, just waiting. Next slide, please. Now, this is causing extreme tension between our constitutional rights and the cash bail system that is currently in place. Now, the Constitution guarantees the people of the United States two rights that are currently being violated in the opinion of some, or in the opinion of most. It guarantees the people the Fifth Amendment, which states everyone, whether your race, age, gender, everyone is innocent until proven guilty. The Constitution also states within the Sixth Amendment that everyone is entitled to a fair and speedy trial, which often doesn't happen. Next slide, please. So, how bad is it? Well, according to the data collected by the Bail Project, about 2.5 million people are held in jail each year. I want you to let that sink in. About 2.5 million people are held in jail each year because they can't afford to pay bail. That's a tremendous amount of people, honestly. Now, the data also shows individuals who are detained pre-trial are 30% more likely to plead guilty. 30%. 30% more likely to plead guilty than those who are not. Ladies and gentlemen, there is an urgent, and I cannot stress when I say urgent need for bail reform. Next slide, please. So, how bad is detention within Harris County? Next slide. As you can see, on an average night between September 13th and September 19th, there were 4,437 people incarcerated on pretrial felonies. Now, these numbers are extremely shocking to some, and to others, it's just another day. Next slide, please. Now, can you believe that taxpayers spent over $2.3 million? $2.3 million. And I want to put emphasis on that because it's $2.3 million detaining individuals who are being held on an illegal pretrial detention. Just last week in Harris County, just last week, Harris County taxpayers spent $2.3 million. This is according to the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. Next slide, please. It is extremely critically important to understand how pretrial detention impacts individuals of our community simultaneously. It not only causes jails to be overcrowded, it makes social distancing impossible within the jails, which ultimately leads to the spread of COVID. Not to mention, it causes individuals to lose their jobs, their houses, and contact with their families. I mean, it's hard enough to know that you can possibly lose your family, but it gets even worse. Did you know if you are unable to post bail, you are more likely to take a plea deal, possibly get a longer sentence, despite whether you are innocent or guilty? And the racial disparities, they're clearly evident. But let's not get too down. Change may be on the horizon. Judge Rosenthal has already determined that misdemeanor bail reform is unconstitutional, as stated in the O'Donnell versus Harris County lawsuit. And as some may know, the felony bail reform case is currently pending because it raises the same issue as misdemeanor bail. And that's outlined in the Russell lawsuit. So if we could just take a moment to reflect on the information that we have just heard. The numbers, they're unbelievable. The impact it's having is critical. It's time for us to come together as one and make an impact. So with that being said, I think it would be best to have a quick recap from the Restoring Justice team.
The original purpose of bail was to serve as an incentive to return to court when a person is arrested, released, and their case proceeds. However, the current money bail system has little to do with this original intent.
Even though you're presumed innocent under the law, if you cannot afford your cash bail, you have to wait in jail until your case is completed. Sometimes that can take weeks, but more typically, it takes months or even years.
And like Khalif Browner, who spent 3 years in prison without being convicted of a crime, struggled with mental health after he was released and eventually took his own life.
Unfortunately and unjustly, his story is not unique. You can look right downtown in Harris County Jail, where we have the third largest jail population in the country, and you can see several stories similar to Khalif's.
According to the Justice Management Institute, 87% of all incarcerated persons in Harris County Jail are pretrial cases, meaning that they haven't even had the opportunity to appear in court for their sentencing.
According to that same study, the Harris County Jail population has increased to over 8,100 and is set to exceed 10,000 individuals by Labor Day.
With the overwhelming majority of the jail population consisting of pretrial cases, it becomes apparent that reform is desperately needed.
Providing a holistic approach, Restoring Justice positions itself to shake up the criminal justice system as we know it.
Help us reimagine a system that is less punitive and more transformative.
Help us in our pursuit of ending mass incarceration.
One client and one heart at a time.
So now that you have an understanding of how money bail works and how it impacts our community, here's how you can get involved. Next slide, please. You can donate. To make a donation, you can go to restoringjustice.org/give. However, if you're not able to contribute financially, you can sign up as a volunteer to become a Restoring Justice coordinator for Restoring Justice, or you can go and provide jail support release, or if you would really like to get involved, you can go and volunteer with an organization who provides court watch. Now, court watch is critical because it allows you to go and you see the process of how courts work. You're allowed to sit in there, observe, make sure everything is done properly. Now, I was asked, before we leave this space, I would like to leave you with a few reflection questions that you will have the opportunity to discuss within the breakout rooms. I challenge you to list one thing you've learned about the bail system that you didn't know before. I also challenge you to find one thing that you can do towards impacting the bail system and having an impact on somebody's life. Once again, it is an honor and a privilege. And I would like to thank the YMCA for a wonderful, wonderful experience. This tour has been amazing. And I would also like to thank you all for taking time out of your Saturdays to come and learn a little information that can possibly impact millions and save trillions and trillions of lives. Thank you so much.
Thank you again, Carl. So as he mentioned, we are going to go into breakout rooms. And so when you see your breakout room assignment, please just accept. The questions have been placed in the chat. For the facilitators, if you'll just copy and paste those questions so that you'll have them in the chat in your rooms as well. So everyone, you should see your breakout assignments coming very soon.
Carl, thank you so much. That was really eye-opening. It's painful to hear, but definitely something that we all need to know.
Yeah, I was trying to hold it in because it was a couple of parts where it's still hard to watch some of those videos and just dealing with it daily. It's a lot. So, man, but it's a blessing just to be able to share it and get the information out. Oh, hello everyone. There's nobody speaking.
Tiffany, you're the facilitator for this room, right?
Yes, good morning, sorry. So we placed the breakout questions in the chat, and so I'll read it aloud just for your knowledge. What is a new aha you had learning about the justice and bail system? And what is a way you may consider getting involved? So I'll give you a moment just to reflect, but we can share out if you want to unmute your mic and get some time to give some good information.
Well, it's really heartbreaking, and I didn't realize the numbers of people that are locked up for, without trial. It's really heartbreaking, and I'd like to get more information on volunteering and what that involves.
I mean, I've had personal family members experience issues like this, and so I know firsthand how purposefully confusing it is that they make it for the families and the barriers they put up, and how dehumanizing it is. So it's definitely something that needs more attention and needs more critical mass, because we're, in a sense, I believe we're all complicit in this. If we're not willing to do something about it, it's not enough to just say, oh, that's unfortunate. That's how you know, these kind of atrocities continue to persist.
I think for me too, I think it came to light where it blew up, and a lot of individuals became aware when the protesters were getting arrested during the George Floyd rally. And so it blew up, but then I think a lot of individuals kind of forgot about it as the tension died down. It was more like, oh, well, you know, it's just another thing. But there's still people who are in there that's waiting and waiting. The protesters are gone, but there's still people who are stuck in there. So it's a huge thing. I mean, I think it's not focused on as much as it should be. And I hope we continue this discussion and not wait for another rally to happen or something else, but get involved a little bit more.
I think it's interesting for me. I feel extremely complicit because I didn't want to look at Khalif Browner's story in its entirety because I didn't want to process through those emotions that you could be in jail for that long and have not been charged with anything. And I mean, anything. And so having these conversations is very important, and because we've got to figure out what way we can do something about it besides sitting in our own shells and processing these emotions or finding some energy for that, for me at least. We have some more thoughts about the question or what ways we can consider getting involved?
I appreciate everyone who's already shared their thoughts, and I appreciate this event so much. I think that a lot of people don't know what is happening, and it's also unjust. And it was mentioned that, you know, there's a difference between the people who are in jail and the people who are on the bench, and I think that that's very important to acknowledge, because the people who are on the bench, they've never been through so much so much heartache in their lives, so they don't understand and they don't care. So I think that that's another important thing to really understand. And it's also very, very frustrating when you can watch these things and you can still say something like systemic racism does not exist because you haven't experienced it, right? So it's very hard. It's very hard and frustrating to hear this in and out from people who have not experienced it, and even from friends sometimes. But that's why, again, I really appreciate everyone who's already shared everything, and I feel like I've learned so much in these 3 days. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you.
For me, the videos and the discussion brought forth, it just reinforced a lot of things that I've already felt, you know, and the disparity in the criminal justice system. When you see on the news poor people who cannot receive bail, and you say, oh, why are they in jail so long? And then you see someone with substantial financial means, they can commit murder and they're out the very same day, you know, because they have money to post their own bail or to get a bondsman. But poor people don't have that opportunity. I've heard of mothers putting their houses, you know, selling their homes and getting a second mortgage on them so that they can, you know, post a bond for their child. And until you've been in those situations, or until things like this really make you focus on it, and you say, hey, it's just an awful situation for those who are caught up within the system and caught up in situations even where they weren't involved in committing a crime, but they were forced to say, okay, I did it. Just, you gonna let me out? Okay, if I say that someone else did it, even if I don't know they did it, you're going to let me out? And many end up doing that, and then it backfires on them. You know, oh, I thought I had a plea agreement or something, but no, that's not what we said. So it's just hard. And if you can't afford a lawyer and you're in the room by yourself, you know, with someone pounding at you constantly, you just break sometimes and give up. It's just psychologically, it's a difficult situation. And anything that we can do to help, I think many of us would love to do that. Even though we don't like driving downtown where the courts are.
No, we don't.
Getting a way to get down there and be on the juries. We need to not try to get out of juries like I'm guilty of doing. I don't want to come down here and serve on this trial, be here. You know. But we need to take advantage of those, you know, opportunities.
Oh, Miss Wanda, you spoke to my heart because my jury summons just came in the mail, and the first thing was, how can I disqualify myself?
You need to go, Tiffany.
And you just said that, and thank you, ma'am.
I'm guilty of doing it all the time. I hope I don't get a summons anytime soon. But when I do, oh, what can I say? Oh, what did that person do? Oh, I don't want to do this. And I've served on a couple, maybe 3 juries that were really educational and enlightening. That's a great learning experience also. Just inconvenient. I'm turning my mic off.
Thank you, Ms. Wanda. Yeah, I'm still stuck, I think, on the psychological terror of it all. So when you use the word, you know, the psychological impacts, it's hard to undo when something has been psychologically done to you. And the power systems that are at play, it really does leave me speechless.
Which leads to understanding why we are so angry when people tell us to just do something different. Like the situation is cyclical. You have been taught a certain thing, treated a certain way for so many years, and all of a sudden you're just supposed to move out of that. And I think that is the hard part. You know, those people shouldn't have been in jail. Well,
right. Or when people just say, just don't break the law.
Don't break the law. True, but what brought us to this? This person was trafficked, like in the video, she was trafficked. So what else did she know? What else was taught? And now she's in a situation where she can't learn anything, because what are you learning in jail besides a trade? I appreciate all of you for being open in this space. We have a few more minutes to share before we go back. And so if you have anything else to share, we really appreciate to hear it.
If I could, I would encourage everyone just to go and do a court watch. If you can, just do it by yourself. Just go and just pick a courtroom and sit and observe. There are so many civil rights that are being violated within these courts. I've seen instances where a young lady, she was shackled to the witness stand without being read her rights, without knowing what she was being arrested for or anything. She was then stood up, patted down by a male officer in the middle of the entire courtroom. That shouldn't have never happened. But if we wouldn't have been able to there to observe it, then we couldn't have reported it. So it starts in the courtroom. Like I said, if I challenge everyone just to go pick one courtroom, sit there and just watch it and observe and see what you observe, you'll be surprised. It's heartbreaking.
I think it's important that we share the things that we're learning with the younger people so that they really understand the history of civil rights and all of that. And also what happens to you if you get caught up in this system, you know, we want to show you how this young man, what he had to endure, the things that go on. It's not peaches and cream back there by any means. Show them, teach them, teach them, teach them. Just keep.
Oh, we cut Miss Wanda off. I'm sorry, Miss Wanda.
Miss Wanda want to finish her thought?
Yeah, I'm trying to see where she.
For a moment there, I thought that was my nephew in the swimming pool.
No, Wanda is good. We just want to continue to learn more. And as we learn more, share what we've learned with our contemporaries, with our children, nieces, nephews, students, the whole realm, you know, of civil rights, racism, the jail system, the bail bondsman system, just everything.
Absolutely, thank you. We are running a little ahead of schedule, which is great. Our next speaker will be joining us at 11:30, which means that we actually have some time to continue to debrief and reflect as a large group. So, you know, we have enough of us that are on. Feel free to unmute. Let us continue this conversation. I do want to kind of pick up on something that Ms. Wanda said about engaging our young people in these conversations as well. And for those of you who don't know, the YMCA has a program called Youth in Government that has been in existence here in Texas since the 1930s. And as a youth worker, I think that one of the most valuable opportunities that we can give to our young people, particularly our young people of color, is to provide experiences and opportunities for them to sit in a courtroom when they're not the defendant, when they're there as part of a learning experience, when it's not as a means of intimidation or restricting their freedom. Because far too often that is their first experience. It's something that is a negative experience, either for them directly or with a family member. So I, you know, just want to do a plug for programs like that, where young people can see themselves as the judge, as the attorney, as the helper, as the leader, and not as the person on the stand, not as a criminal. Representation absolutely matters. And this is a great opportunity for us to encourage our young people to participate in civic engagement and know that they have an active role to play in it. Their voice matters, their perspective matters, their experiences matter, and their communities need them as leadership.
Let me just inject another thing that, speaking about exposure to young people, many of you may already know, but Prairie View A&M University has juvenile justice curriculum, and in that, and on that campus, they have a mock trial jury room, where the young people can actually, experience the courtroom, and that's something that I don't know the Y may want to look at as far as exposing some of the young people to also being able to go up there and experience that. It's powerful, and it's set up just like an actual courtroom where the children, who are studying, whether they want to be probation officer, whatever, they can actually have courtroom settings and mock trials and so on and so forth. So I think it's powerful to expose children early to that, and it broadens their perspective of opportunities for them. And that will change the system. You change the system when you change the people in the system.
I have one thing. We was in the small groups, and I wanted to challenge this to everyone on this call. If you could just go and pick a random courtroom and just sit and watch the proceedings as they go, you will be surprised. I think it starts there, because there are so many civil rights that are being violated right in the courtroom, but none of us, there's not that many individuals, unless you're on trial or you're supposed to be there. Nobody really goes and sits and just watches. So I think that is a huge thing. I challenge everyone on this call to just go and pick whether it be this week or next, or when COVID is over, when you're able to attend court, just go and sit and watch and just observe so you can learn the proper process. And then from there, we can report it as a whole and change the things that are not being done properly. That's the only way it starts, is there.
There were some questions in the chat and some responses in the chat, so we actually have some time. And Rutha, if you'd like to unmute. Welcome, good to see you.
Hi, good to see you, Sherry. Good to see everyone. Yeah, I was just addressing, Stephanie had put a couple of questions in the chat that they had in their breakout room. And the first question was, if the current bail system has been determined unconstitutional, why is it still operational? And the response, that's a great question. The response to that as it relates to Harris County is that the O'Donnell lawsuit only related to the misdemeanor bail setting practice. And so the challenge was that when you use these kinds of schedules, you aren't taking into account the actual individual. You're just basing it on the crime charged. And so the challenge was that that kind of system violates the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution. It violates the Due Process Clause of the Constitution. And that case ended up settling. So they now are doing the exact same challenge for the exact same reasons for the felony system. I mean, this is how the courts work. You can't always do everything at the same time. And, you know, in our dream world, the judges and the district attorney's office would have seen, okay, like, you know, the misdemeanor case presented these exact same issues. Let's go ahead and reform it on our own. Of course, we know that didn't work. It's going to require a lawsuit. It's going to require like a process. And so now those exact same challenges are being made for the felony system. And it is likely that the courts will rule the same way, that it is unconstitutional, or that it does violate these protections because it doesn't actually take the individual into account. You're doing it based on a schedule, based on a chart, not based on the human in front of you. And that was that point that Carl was making, which is that if you earn $1 million a year, if that chart tells you that your bond is $1,000, that could be inconsequential to you. If you're earning $1 million, you don't care if you get that $1,000 back. You'll never show up to court. But if you earn $5,000 a year and you can't pay that $1,000 bond, that same bond is actually going to result in you being trapped in jail, because $1,000 is a lot for someone who earns $5,000 a year, but it's nothing for someone who earns $1 million a year. And that's the problem. If you don't take the human into account, you're just using numbers, and the numbers don't really make any sense. As far as where the bail money goes, which is Stephanie's second question, when you post bail, it's basically held in an account. And if you actually show up to all of your court appearances, do what you're supposed to do, follow all of the conditions, at the conclusion of the case, even if you plead guilty, even if you get sentenced, you get the bail money back. So it's not that you pay the $1,000 or the $10,000 and you never see it again. You actually do get the money back if you follow all of the conditions. If you don't follow the conditions, if you fail to come to court, then the bail money that you post gets forfeited, and it goes to the government.
So Amrutha, to say that the case settled, does that mean that it's been reformed and changed?
For the misdemeanor practice, yeah. So most people charged with misdemeanors get released without actually having to post bonds. So if you look at like earlier this summer after the second George Floyd protest, the June 2nd protest, which was the really big one, hundreds of folks were arrested. And they were mostly charged with a misdemeanor for obstruction of a highway. And most of them none of them actually had to actually post any cash to be released.
Doesn't the bail bond company also get a fee?
If you use the bail bond company, yeah, they keep 10%. So if your bond is $5,000, you can either put up the full $5,000 if you have it in cash, or you can go to a bail bonds company. The bail bonds company will put up the $5,000, but you will give them 10% of that, and you won't get that $500 back.
It looks like we have a couple more questions in the chat. Would love to ask our friends from Restoring Justice to help us with these.
So Ruth's question was, is that, Carl showed some pictures of the top 3 judges with defendants in pretrial detention, and they were Black. Why is that? The reality is that, bail reform is an issue that, we know that the individuals who are impacted by the bail system, who are discriminated by it, are Black and brown. That's just the truth. If you look at the numbers and who's stuck in jail because they can't post bail, it is individuals who are Black and brown. So that's the reality of the race of the impact. But for the judges, Harris County, the beautiful thing about Harris County is that it has one of the most diverse benches that I've seen in the country. There are so many Black judges on the bench. But this is an issue that, regardless of the judge's race, is something that all judges need to get better on. So yes, it is true that at the moment, many of the judges who actually do have bonds that prevent defendants from being released are Black judges, and that's just the reality of the numbers. And then Norma, your question, are the protesters still being charged? Some are, a very small percentage, probably 10 days or so, 2 weeks maybe, after they were arrested. They were arrested and charged by the district attorney's office, arrested by HPD and charged by the district attorney's office. They were largely really young people, 18 to 25-year-olds predominantly, who were scared and who were traumatized. There was a large local outpouring of concern about the fact that they were arrested. There was a lot of information presented that they weren't arrested lawfully, that a lot of them were trapped by the police. Ultimately, the district attorney ended up dismissing about 800 charges. So most of the protesters who were charged with that misdemeanor obstruction of a highway are no longer facing charges. However, they still have an arrest record. And so we're trying to work with law firms to help expunge their arrest records, because as everyone knows, even just having an arrest record can get in the way of your college and your employment prospects. And so we're trying to expunge that. So it's a time-consuming process, but we're hoping to get that to happen. And yes, Nancy, change is happening. New York has already engaged in bail reform and actually ended cash bail in a lot of instances. That was kind of a direct impact of the tragic situation that Khalif Browner was in. But this lawsuit that we talked about is just for Harris County. So it's a slow process. These types of lawsuits challenging the bail system are happening all around the country. But of course, the fastest way to do it is to, not fastest, but the direct way to impact the largest group would be legislation. When you do it through a lawsuit, it's going to be a narrower impact.
Yeah, so Stephanie, do you want to unmute and say what you said so that I'm not having to just read your words? Because it's something that I think we have a few minutes that we can have some honest dialogue about.
Yeah, I was responding to the point about the fact that some of the judges who have the highest numbers of these kinds of bails are either Black or brown. And to me, that's also an example of systemic racism, that the system itself is organized to negatively impact communities of color more than any other. And it also reminds me of the Breonna Taylor case. A lot of people are surprised at the result of that, given the fact that the Attorney General is African American, but sometimes the system itself can overwhelm maybe even the potential good intentions of some of the folks who work within the system. And you can't always assume that Black and brown people are exempt from racism. Racism requires being in a position of power, and sometimes Black and brown people who are remiss or ill-informed can use their power to hold down or negatively impact other Black and brown people, which is why, again, systemic racism exists. It's not just individual, but they can leverage an entire system that was intended to negatively impact some of those communities.
Absolutely. I think that's why this platform is so important, is that we all have to unlearn racism, because no matter what we look like, it's likely that we went to schools and we were brought up in an education system that has indoctrinated things into us no matter what we look like. And so when we do have access to being decision makers for, on behalf of community, all you're doing is continuing to perpetrate what you were conditioned to understand about life. So having bias even against people who look like you, that are your neighbors, still, we talk all the time about still rolling up our windows when we see a young Black person with a hoodie on, no matter what the color of our skin is, because that has been conditioned into us, is that they are dangerous, that there is something wrong in that situation. So incredibly important point. So Stephanie, thank you again for bringing that up. There's, I believe, a question regarding being able to share this information out. So this presentation is being recorded, and it seems like our friends at Restoring Justice will be able to share some additional resources with us that in the wrap-up email from our Freedom Tour experience we'll share out with all the participants.
Can someone talk about not only how the laws are maybe unfair, but how much discretion judges have in application of laws when people come before them?
They have complete discretion. So in very, very rare circumstances does the law, and it's only for very serious types of capital crimes, is there any sort of mandated bond? But other than that, which is the rare situation, the judges have complete discretion as to the bonds. So you could be charged with a theft, go before Judge A, who is progressive, and that judge could give you a $100 bond, or you could go before Judge D, who is known to be less progressive as far as bail goes, and that same person could be getting a $1,000 bond or a $10,000 bond. So the schedule existed in theory to try to make it more uniform to prevent that. But ultimately the judges have complete discretion. So if you have a good lawyer and you're originally given a bond that you simply cannot afford, it becomes incumbent on your attorney to then go before the judge and ask for that bail to be lowered. And hopefully your lawyer will advocate for you and will say, look, judge, like my client simply can't afford the $10,000. He's a hardworking father of 3 and earns $36,000 annually, and will present all of those facts to kind of tell the judge, like, you don't have to worry about him. He's not a risk of flight. He's not a danger to the community. If you set a $500 bond, that is sufficient to ensure that he will appear at all of his court dates. And so the problem, of course, is we know that, and this is a whole other presentation, but the indigent defense system is also another way that the system fails our marginalized communities. And so unfortunately, a lot of folks don't even have lawyers making those arguments. And that's a real shame, because then they end up stuck in jail, even though they might have had a judge who would be willing to lower their bond if they heard the right information about them.
Thank you so much, Amrutha and Carl. Thank you. We've got another question in the chat.
Yes, I'll be brief because I know that we're running out of time here. Why do so many lawyers not show up? I think Maxine's referencing that beginning now this news video where we heard from individuals saying, the lawyers didn't come to court. They don't show up because Harris County has a system where lawyers get overloaded. The court-appointed attorneys do not have caseload limits, which is not the norm in a lot of districts across the country. Court-appointed attorneys have a maximum in terms of how many cases they can take. Harris County does not impose any sort of maximum on attorneys. So there are court-appointed attorneys who take double what is recommended for them to take. And so the result is that they have so many clients, they don't visit their clients in jail, they forget to show up to court, they're constantly just resetting court dates because they can't even keep up with all the cases they have. And so this is another way, when we talk about why aren't these lawyers making arguments to lower bonds, like, again, the issue is that the indigent defense system does not provide adequate, in my view, this is why restoring justice was created, doesn't provide adequate counsel to people who need appointed counsel because they can't afford it. So again, yes, Stephanie, another example of systemic racism, right? If this system is, it's one thing to say you have a right to a lawyer, but if you get a lawyer who doesn't show up and never visits you, what is the value of that right? So that is the problem.
Does the lawyer still get paid their fee, even though they don't show up?
Yep, they submit a voucher at the end of their case and collect whatever money the judge reviews the voucher, they look at their hours, and they get paid for whatever hours they submit that the judge approves.
So they can run up quite a bit of income annually on that, can't they?
Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Yep. That's why, that's why they keep accepting the cases, right? They financially benefit from it. So the more cases you take, the more court appearances, you're trying to get to, supposed to get to, actually going to, the more money you make. So, it's not based on the quality of representation. There's no consideration of, was your client happy with the service you provide? There's no consideration of, did you file motions and make arguments that you should have made? It's literally, quantity, hours billed gives you income.
Awesome. Thank you so much again, Amrutha, and for all the great questions that were in the chat and asked out loud. That's what today is about. That's what all of this is about, is us learning and uncovering some things that maybe we were even scared to ask before, because once you know the truth, I always say once the toothpaste is out of the tube, it's like you can't unknow once you have learned some things. So, in the words of Maya Angelou, once you know better, then we also have a responsibility to do better. So I am honored to be learning in community with you all today, and look forward to acting together as we move forward. Jenny?
Thank you, Sherry. I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Angela Jackson, who has joined us. Dr. Angela Jackson is core faculty in the Masters of Arts Counseling program in the Townsend Institute at Concordia University, Irvine. She's a licensed clinical professional counselor in Illinois and is equipped to empower diverse clients with culturally responsive treatment. She is the owner of Culturally Competent Training, LLC, training others to become culturally competent and socially justice-minded. As a keynote speaker, she is charged to address cultural awareness and sensitive collective societal issues, such as systemic racism and oppression. She is the author of the Cultural Awareness Journal, available on Amazon.com. As the Diversity and Inclusion Chair in her program, Dr. Jackson serves on the Mental Health Subcommittee under the Retention and Persistence Committee for the university. She makes herself available to mentor and challenge students on their calling into the profession. Furthermore, she presented on the topic of competencies in culture, knowing yourself, knowing your students at CUI RAD, August 2020. She welcomes representing CUI at the national and state levels on topics such as ethical mental health practices that empower the African American community at the Law and Ethics Conference, February 2019. Her research focus includes multicultural and social justice counseling competencies, interrupting inequity and injustice on behalf of the African American clients in the 21st century. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Jackson.
Thank you.
can win the war individually. It take the wisdom of the elders and young people's energy. Welcome to the story we call.
So, hello, everyone. It's such an honor to be here, and I am very excited to just be on the same page with YMCA of Houston and this virtual tour, this virtual freedom tour. So, and I also want to, as I begin, we're going to talk primarily about race and classism and the intersection of those. However, I do recognize gender, you know, and heterosexism. So those are other constructs that are valuable. And but I want to make sure that we know that my focus today will be on the racial and more of the classism. So dealing with the isms. So with that being said, you know, race is a social construct. So if you haven't heard that before, let's go on this journey together. Actually, today is really a conversation. It's a cultural dialogue. So you can take notes, you can, you know, put comments in the chat box, and please keep me on time, whoever the timekeeper is. I have my notes here, but I don't want to get too hung up on certain slides because I like to talk. So I want to acknowledge that now. So at 45 minutes, please let me know. So back to race as a social construct. So, you know, 400 years ago, okay, we're talking about Africans being taken from their homeland and coming to Virginia in 1619. And so race, where we judge and enslave people, that's when it started in the US. Okay, so this was created. This is not something that, oh, you know, wow, you know, what does it mean to, you know, be Black or white or what have you? That construct of meaning with race started in the US. So, and in that context, I want to make sure I explain that. Furthermore, words are powerful. So I think about enslavement and I think about slavery. So what enslavement, we're talking about making someone a slave, okay? And then we talk about slavery, well, you're the legal property of someone owns you. So this frames our conversation for today as we, you know, talk about systemic racism. We can go to the next slide. Thank you. So I mentioned the 400 years, and I think it's important to understand that because sometimes I'll speak for African Americans, we're told to, oh, that was in the past. Oh, you know, let's talk about current things. Well, no other culture is asked to forget their history. So we're not going to forget ours either. So it's critical. There's no way I can have a conversation about racism without talking about the enslavement of Africans, the 400-year history. That's number one. Number two, equality versus equity. Now I bring that up because, you know, our US Constitution says, we the people. You know, I have had challenges with that. I've listened to many researchers and speakers on the topic, and especially of color, and they often say, it does not feel like we the people means all the people. Okay, so I want to acknowledge that as well. And then we're talking about equity. Sometimes, you know, again, back to words having meaning and unpacking these words. And equity has to do with fairness, justice. So many may say, okay, well, you say that we're equal, even though that can be debated as human beings and treated equally, but what does that look like when it comes to justice? And what does that look like with opportunities and access? So education, what have you. So there's a disparity when it comes to what equity really means. Now, white privilege, I'm going to talk about that, I think, on the next slide. But I want to mention that from my experience, if you're not in education or you haven't been in a classroom to unpack this term, often the everyday person, especially white person, gets offended by the term white privilege. So whether it's in our churches, whether it's in higher education, in our communities, you know, if you just talk to a person, they're like, what do you mean white privilege? I don't have any privileges. And I would ask you, if there's anyone here or someone you know, one thing you can do to kind of test this theory of to me, this uncomfortableness with white privilege is to ask a white person or someone here, ask yourself, what does it mean to be white? Just ask that question. If anyone here is thinking, well, I'm not white, or I'm, you know, you describe yourself by your ethnicity or some other form of your cultural identity, well, that's interesting. It's an interesting place to pause, because typically people of color have a response to what it means to be white, but often whites do not. So to me, this is a lack of education for our entire country. And to me, 400 years, that context of slavery, white privilege, all of these things need to be in K through 12 and higher education. I think they have requirements sometimes for general elective, well, these are required courses so that we can at least be on the same page when we're having knowledge about these discussions. So what it means to be white is a very important question, and I think it needs an answer, especially from white Americans. So moving on to unconsciousness and implicit bias. Well, unconsciousness really ties into implicit bias, because what it's saying is that that one is operating at an unconscious level, meaning they're really not aware of you know, what they're saying or what the behavior or actions are, but they're operating out of it anyway. So implicit bias, that you have a perception about a group of people that basically can be discriminatory or prejudice, and again, it's out of one's awareness. So often people will say, well, you know, I wasn't aware, you know, that I did that, you know, or I responded this way, or I said A, B, or C. So I'm sorry. And but part of the work with implicit bias, and there's a lot of tests right on the internet, you can Google it and even take some because they're free, and you can see what happens when you take that test. But the point is that it's time to get conscious. It's time for a change in our language and our behavior, and just going to the default of, well, I didn't know, or I don't want to speak up because I don't want to offend someone. It's time to be called on being conscious. So again, that's a part of our dialogue today. And I put colorism up here because sometimes there's so many pockets and components of these topics that we're having today. So colorism. So there is meaning when we look at people within a culture, and they have different colors within their own skin tone. And so typically the lighter, and I'll speak for people of color, when your skin is lighter and represents more of European descent, then there usually is a positive association with you, a more comfort level with you. And this can be within any of our cultures, you know, African American, Asian, Latino, you know, Indian, you know, Native American. It's that degree of color in our skin. And even if I might add that white Americans tend to, and this is an oxymoron though, when white Americans tend to get tanned or darken their skin, then it's considered something that's positive. So again, just being aware of these conversations and the knowledge and the meaning that's going into these terms and these conversations. And depending on what environment you're in, the conversation can go different ways. My call to you all is to know who you are. So, you know, white, what does it mean to be white? You need to have an answer to that. African Americans, what does it mean to be African American? I use African American and Black, you know, simultaneously. Some may use other terms, but that's what I use. And so you have to recognize your history. And if you're not aware of that, speaking for African Americans, then why aren't you? You need to acknowledge what it means to be Black, or the absence of recognizing what your Blackness is. And then our other cultures as well. So know who you are. And culture, you know, it's composed of a lot of entities. We're talking about the racial identity right now. We'll talk about gender, economics, so, and even religion may come up today. Next slide, please. So back to the white privilege component. I wanted to unpack this for a second. Now, Peggy McIntosh, some of you may have heard of her. If you haven't, she's the originator of the term white privilege, okay? I went to Virginia Tech for my doctorate, and I actually met her in a workshop there that she was you know, over and conducting. And she's from Virginia, which I didn't realize that. So with that being said, she is white and she's female, and she actually wrote this article that unpacks what I'm going to share right now. And she wrote the article, and this is from her own words. She has a 5-minute video on YouTube that you can listen to. And she says she was, I guess you would say, irritated, infuriated to some degree that the whites, that the Blacks at her university were saying that white women are oppressive to work with. That was the message that she received from her Black colleagues. And she said, you know, we're nice people, etc. You can watch her video. And so after she went home, I guess, and thought about it, she started writing down all of these statements or assertions of what it meant to be white. And that started her article on white privilege. So how does she define it? She says that whites have the privilege of walking around with an invisible knapsack of benefits that they can bank on cashing in. Now, some of you may say, well, what does that mean? You know, okay, I don't have any more privileges than anyone else. I'm just going to give you a couple. Again, they're outlining her own article, and I don't have a copy of her article for you all. However, so some of us may say, you know, have the experience of hearing microaggressions, such as you speak well, or you know, you're excuse me, asset to your race. Or you can, one of the statements that I really happened to reflect on recently is that whites have the, Peggy McIntosh. Yeah, Peggy McIntosh is her name. I can write it in the chat or spell it out at the end, most definitely. But that, for example, whites have the privilege of living in the neighborhood that they want to and attending church in the same community. And I thought of myself in Chicago. I don't have that privilege. I live in one community and I have to drive really far to go to my church. That's an example. Going into a, you know, a regular drugstore, and I think things are changing now, thank God, but having the privilege to see magazines that look like you know, and having this array of magazines and, you know, that are just available to you. And often there's a section for people of color. And so sometimes they may have a magazine depending on what community you're in, and sometimes they may not. To me, that's privilege. And even hair products, again, these things are changing, but if you go into some communities, specifically that are predominantly white, you may see very little hair care products for people of color. Again, these are changing, but this was the premise of our article. So I want to unpack that because that attributes to the context of white privilege when people are saying, what do you mean white privilege? And so now I want to shift into some of these structures that are operating within white privilege and this invisibility, this context of whiteness. So I think about the judicial system, okay? So I've worked in the judicial system for a couple years, K through 12, and I was just abhorred that my client roster included 80% African-American males. This is K through 12. So I'm working with 12-year-olds all the way to 17-year-old African-American males as my clients, providing mental health for them and their families, even representing them in court. So we're just talking about K through 12. We're not talking about the larger incarceration of African-American men, but this is the pipeline that leads to that. So we represent 13% of the population, yet these largest percentages in the judicial system. So I am very, very passionate about this context. And there's so much work that's being done by other African Americans, and I applaud their work, but it's just appalling to me. So we need work in that system, and that system has socio-political context, but I'm not going to get into all of that. So that structure needs to be unpacked and dismantled. Churches. Some of you may say, okay, churches, what do you mean? Well, I mean, let's pause for a second and think about churches. So I am a Christian, and a lot of times you may say, well, we're one body. There's no, Gentile or Jew. There's no differences as Christians. But I want to tell you, there is a difference if you walk into some of our churches and you can feel if you're wanted or not wanted. I've gone in some community. I've gone to all white church. I've gone to all Black churches. And so again, the leadership has responsibility to unpack these topics and bring them into the congregation and to the discussions. Some of you may disagree. Part of doing this work is to respectfully disagree with one another. My premise is that we need to recognize difference and respect difference and even equity in our churches. So that's one thing. And I think Jamar Tisby is doing this work, and he has one book on, forgive me, I don't have it at my fingertips, but he does work on racism in the church. I can just put it that way. Jamar Tisby, and phenomenal work. And so that's his calling. And so check his work out, because I think that we need to do work in that area as well. And then we have the housing, education, COVID-19, all of those help me to think of structural racism, systemic racism, where we have the majority of people of color that are dying from this disease. By me being a mental health therapist, I often cannot look at or think about some of the deaths that are happening at an alarming rate, because I feel re-traumatized. Yes, I do. We can't go to the funerals. Many of us are in assisted living or nursing homes where the care is deplorable. And then with housing, economics, people are losing their homes, becoming homeless, can't pay their rent. Education, many don't have the Wi-Fi that people naturally assume that they should have. Being a human being, everybody doesn't automatically have Wi-Fi. Everybody doesn't automatically have computers, to do the work at home. So for their children and family, nor have the daycare expenses. This is how poverty is built into these structures, and having people of color, at the mercy of white privilege. And in the media, I have to say, the media is interesting, because back to these images of colorism and accepting and people feeling inferior and superior. So I want to bring up just a couple points that I'm thinking about with at least two persons in the media. One has to do with, well, they're not recent, but I think Kirk Franklin, for example, with the Dove Awards. Now, that's a Christian award program. And I remember that at one point there was a boycott and he had to speak out because when he wanted to speak after receiving his award, when he brought up race, they cut his speech out because of the race context. That's structural racism. How, and I agree, he was flabbergasted. I'm speaking about what it means to receive this award, and I'm talking about my identity with race, and that's eliminated. Again, that's what made Christian one of the cultural identities of faith. So we want to recognize when these things happen. Furthermore, and I say these things respecting the Dove Awards, respecting, I'm going to also mention Good Morning, what is it, the show with Gabriel Union, what is it called? America's Got Talent, excuse me. Well, Gabriel Union, I think it was last season, was on the show, and there was some controversy. She, I assume, was fired. I don't know for sure, but she left the show. And part of the reason was her hairstyle. So now we're talking about, you know, how media or how the TV industry, television industry, and these shows can minimize and diminish people based on their hair texture, hairstyle, especially if it's not centered around whiteness and what looks European. These are just facts. These are things that are happening. I'm not creating these dynamics. I'm not trying to make up any dynamics. This is what's happening. Next slide, please. So just want to slow it down here a little bit. And again, keep me, I'm not sure the time frame right here, because I do want to have time for a discussion. And I'm not sure how much that I have to left to speak on these last two slides. But so we'll start with this term hegemonic structural power. So first of all, let's break down these terms again. 25 minutes up. Thank you so much. Okay, that gives me a little bit of, I'll try to use 10 minutes on this slide and then the rest on the next slides. And then we can have time for some questions and interaction, because I really like to interact. So let's go with the word hegemony. So what that means is a dominance of one social group or class in a society. So back to power. And I equate systematic racism with power, okay? So there's a power structure in racism when we look at how the themes of power are permeated throughout our structures in society. And I talked about some of those structures in the previous slides. So it's built into the system. So it's seamless. You really cannot identify it at times. Because some organizations may say, with this structural power here, well, we have, you know, EEO practices that say that we, you know, hire accordingly, and, you know, we have a process that's equitable. But then when you look throughout the organization, you have lower representation, you have minimal diversity, you have few people in positions of power. So back to this, let me go back to my term on the hegemonic power. So when we talk about hegemonic power, again, it's not using force, but the power rests in and I'm just going to use some of these terms I've gotten from the internet, Wikipedia, what have you, whatever shows up that's been internet-based, but some of this language, I'm just repeating what's already out there in our systems, in our educational systems. So hegemonic power, it rests on the successful manipulation of cultural and social institutions like the media, like, you know, the incarceration of the criminal justice system, to shape the limits of economic and political powers for citizens. So with that being said, we're going to add the component of race there. So these the economic and socio-political opportunities are based on race. That's what has been put into the system. So the power rests in white privilege, white supremacy. And I'm going to tell you, as a Christian, as a human being, I was raised to understand who I am. And as a Christian, we want to acknowledge humanity in everybody. So as I'm speaking, when I'm speaking using terms like white privilege, white superiority, marginalization, et cetera, I speak that respectfully, but I'm also speaking truth to power, because we cannot minimize these issues. The time is now. I'm passionate about these issues, but we've got to do better, and the time is now. So, so again, there's a manipulation going on with this hegemonic structural power that has us not even recognizing when things are happening that are inequitable, okay? So let's see here. I already talked about the unequal access, and to me that goes back to, we can say we the people means all the people, but again, look at this, the structural powers, and even within our nonprofits. I have done training in the past with nonprofits, and I respect them. I respect the work that you all are doing, but I want you all to recognize that even in the YWCA, whether it's in Houston or nationally in other places, you all have a responsibility to unpack and look at these issues as well. What does the board look like? What does, not just look like, but speak like? I'm calling out to all cultures. Often whites are in a position of power, but even if you're an African-American, Latino, Asian, the other cultures that I haven't mentioned, our Native American brothers and sisters, you have a responsibility to be aware of who you are too, and how you have also may be culturally unaware. I have worked with so many students that don't look like me, and I'm thinking they're getting all of this knowledge. Where are my African-American brothers and sisters getting this knowledge? They're not. So they're not going to have the same level of education and even access to these terms that I'm talking about. So we've got to do better. So again, I get excited. So back to, what was I saying here? Back to the unequal access. So I feel the walls myself. I have an advanced degree. I'm a licensed clinician. But let me tell you, at the end of the day, I'm an African-American. I can walk down the street. I'm going to be followed. I'm going to be her profile. I'm going to be stereotyped just like any other person. And it has happened. Oh, I didn't know you were this or that. No, you don't need to know my educational background. I'm a human being that wants to be acknowledged for my humanity and not profiled. So now going on to the class structure, I speak of, back to the race as a social construct. I'm going to say class, the structures of class, socioeconomic structure. So we have the poverty level, and then we have, middle class and upper middle class and all of these things. So again, just inherent in those terms, there's a association that the higher economic structure you're in, you probably are European. In the lower socioeconomic sandwich you're probably a person of color. See, and that's again built in that system of racism. So we're gonna automatically approach people differently based on their class, based on our assumptions about how much money they make, where they live. These things have really powerful repercussions in our discussions and how we communicate with people, meet people, again, in your organizations as well. And I did mention ableism in the beginning because, and I want to highlight that here because even in my field, I want to respectfully say that we don't give enough attention to ableism or the disabilities, whether they're mental, physical, what have you. So think about if you're a person of color, you have a physical disability as well, you may have a learning disability, you may live in poverty. Think at all those intersections of that person's cultural identity and the levels of oppression that are embedded there. And then in my field of mental health, oh my goodness, many times we don't even seek therapy because we don't trust the system. And I have to deal with my own biases with that, and I'm in the field. So we're going to keep it real today. We're going to keep our conversation real today. Yeah. So let's go to our last slide here. I think this is my last slide. Oh, if it's not, I may have, okay, I have 2 more, so let me hurry up. Thank you for, I'm glad I saw that. So, so kind of breaking down this economic power structure. So I just want to say a couple things here because I want to get on to the next slides. I almost forgot I had 2 more slides. So for me, and this is from my professional experiences, my education, my personal experiences, and being a human being. See, I'm all of those things. That's why you have to know who you are. To me, when I think of breaking down systematic racism, you've got to attack the positions of power in these institutions. So what do I mean? Not only do we need people of color in the positions of power, so whether you're on the board, you're owning you have a position of being a president or what have you, you need to be culturally competent, and you need to be in those positions, first of all, be culturally competent more, and then because that gives you the powers to make decisions that break down those walls. One of my mentors, his name, I have many mentors, they all different types of backgrounds. His name is Roger Malat. He happens to be Caucasian. When I was in my master's program years ago, somebody gave me one of his tapes on stress management for professionals. And you can be amazed at what you learn. He's passed away, and he has, I think, a cassette series on stress management, and there may not be many copies of it. The bottom line is that in those series, I learned a couple things that were powerful about culture, and values. So one of the things he says is that you need to know who you are. And so let's talk about difference, he says. So he says, you can be different, but you don't have to be powerless. To me, that was astounding, because many of us that are different, especially in the context of race, that's what's entrenched in us, is to feel powerless. And I'm gonna tell you from experience, those days are over for me. They're just over. So I'm gonna tap into my higher power, my faith, what I know, and do the best of my ability, and not embracing any sense of powerlessness. So, but that's what we've been taught. So he says, wait a minute, you don't have to feel powerless. So think about that. Furthermore, he says that if you're in a position of power, white, especially as I'm speaking to at this moment, you have a responsibility to look at your structure system and what you're doing differently. That's how you break down the power. And not just say, oh, I'm going to bring in a person of color to be over diversity, or, it's beyond that. You need to be spearheading that conversation and echoing and supporting that person before you even hire them. So who are you? Have you recognized who you are? Again, that's a powerful piece for the persons in a position of power, because if they don't own it and you bring it in somebody else, then are you really translating that you value diversity behaviorally, which is what Malat also says. So he says, one of the things that we have to do is identify your value system and support it behaviorally. That's Malat's words. And so I put up here, not what you say is what you do. So if you're not behaviorally supporting what you say you value, there's a conflict there. There's a conflict there. And so you need to recognize that that you need to change either your value system and say it for what it really is, and say we're working on it, or behaviorally change your power, your power structure and those in position of power. Because to me, when you have decision making, that's power. When you just say, oh, I'm going to have somebody in leadership, or I'm going to promote them to assistant director or director, well, does it come with power? If it doesn't come with the power element of making decisions, that may not truly be power and leadership. Okay, can we go to my last slide, please? Okay, so let's see here. I have a few things here I want to make sure I mention. So I've talked about economic power. I'm bringing that up often because to me, that's a big part of systematic racism. I can honestly tell you, I would love my 40 acres and a mule. Yeah, Google that term if you're not sure what that is, because it hasn't been given. our country back to the Constitution and even the power, is it the doctrine of discovery. It talks about having, to me, the power structure of owning land in this country, and it doesn't fall in the hands of people like me. So yeah, so that's why I keep bringing up the economic power. So let me kind of go on to justice and recognizing some other things that we need justice in. To me, I'll bring up racial discrimination, profiling, stereotyping, all under the language of microaggressions. So we have these terms that keep coming up, common microaggressions. That's a common one. So what does that mean? So basically, I'm going to put it in a nutshell. It's these, I don't agree necessarily that there's slight indignities, but that's the term that goes with it, that there's these slight indignities that are said about people of color. And again, they're said in an unconscious way often. So for example, some I'm going to use, and this is from one of my textbooks, Sue and Sue, we use in our diversity course. The textbook is Counseling the Culturally Diverse. They're powerful, they're authored by Asian authors, and I think he has some other people of color authoring as well. But anyway, so what are some of the messages? One is a microaggression, the category is called alien in your own land. So what do we mean? It means that Asian and Latin Americans are often assumed to be foreign born. So someone may see them and say, oh, where are you from? And they're like, New York or Texas? No, where are you really from? That's a microaggression, that you are alien in your own country, that someone is not acknowledging that you are born in the US. Another one is, I'm going to say, an inscription of intelligence. So you're assigning a degree of intelligence to a person of color or a woman, might I add, based on their race or gender. So, well, you know, you're pretty intelligent. Usually those statements come out to people of color or women. Oh, gee, where'd you go to school? You're so articulate. You have a lot of knowledge. Those types of assumptions and descriptions of intelligence, they're coming from somewhere. Okay, so oh, why would they say that? Yeah, man.
Seems like we may have lost Dr. Jackson for a second.
Yeah.
Let's give her a moment to see if she can unfreeze. Very powerful learning so far. While we're working through this technical difficulty, feel free to share in the chat any learnings, ahas, or...
Is it possible to get a copy of her presentation?
Absolutely. So all three presentations from Tuesday, from Thursday, and from today will be shared in the follow-up email that will go out on Monday.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Shayla, did Dr. Jackson log out altogether for now?
Yeah, we're messaging right now to try to get her back in.
Okay. Helena, are you able to copy and paste again the article that you shared regarding the invisible knapsack?
Yes.
And that was Peggy McIntosh.
I may be wrong, but I think she wrote that in like 1988. And I'm so ashamed that I first heard of it this February.
Mm.
And I've shared it with as many people as possible.
Thank you, Nancy. Yes, that was 1988, and a term that only in recent months and years has taken shape. Looks like we have Dr. Jackson back on with us. Thank you all so much for staying on and being patient while we work through some technical difficulties. Okay. Dr. Jackson, our technology tried to make you not be great today, but you've been incredible. We're all at the edge of our seat, so I'm glad you were able to make it back.
Yes, yes. So if you want, I mean, I can end now. I mean, I want to leave enough time for any questions. And I know I was talking about microaggressions. If I have just 2 minutes, can I use 2 minutes and just close?
Yes.
Okay, so I'll just do that then. So with the microaggressions, the last one I do want to mention is the criminality and assumption of a criminal status. And that means that a person of color is presumed to be dangerous, criminal, or deviant based on race. So there's so many instances of that going on. Obviously with the murders and killings of our African-American men within the with the police, and I respect the police as well. I want to say I've done training with police officers, but these are real issues. So the bottom line is that we want to thrive. I'm tired of trying to survive. I'm just going to break it down to you. I'm tired of trying to survive. We want to thrive. And systematic racism, the demantling of that can help us thrive. To me, there's a sickness with the soul of America, that we are still dealing with these issues 400 years regarding systematic racism, and particularly with the African-American community. And we need healing. That's part of the work that I'm trying to do with I'm also have a private practice for a clinician, as a clinician in Illinois. But that's part of the work that keeps coming up with my clients of color. So, and even white clients want to talk about it too. So, with that being said, I will have a shameless plug that I guess I shouldn't say shameless, let me change my language here. I did publish a book. It's a journal called the Cultural Awareness Journal. Years ago, when I started doing this work on my own as an entrepreneur, I created the journal because I wanted a place for all of us in America, anybody, to write down, to have a structured format for becoming culturally aware and taking risks to engage and dismantle these stereotypes and to be engaged in uncomfortable conversations and behavior. So with that being said, I will close and say I do promote supporting our African-American businesses. I think that we need more economic power within our own communities. So thank you so much for your time, and I'll entertain any questions or dialogue.
Thank you so much. Tunde, if you can turn the slides off real quick, thank you. All right, that was a word. This is being recorded for those of us that maybe didn't catch some things the first time. I'm gonna raise my virtual hand here. I will definitely be watching this again. Thank you, Dr. Jackson, thank you so much. And now we have time for some questions and just some conversation with Dr. Jackson.
Be shy.
Dr. Jackson, if I wanted to try to get out of the little bubble that I live in and find out more about the world. During this time of COVID-19, where should I be reaching out? Whom should I be trying to work with?
Okay. Thank you. What's your name?
My name is Ruth.
Ruth. Okay. Thank you so much, Ruth, for asking that question. I don't want to assume you identify as white, European American?
That is correct. I do identify as white. In fact, I identify as Germanic in background.
Okay. See,
that's my second language.
Oh, see there, we're having a cultural dialogue. So with that being said, this is what I would honestly tell you. To the content of this webinar, if you will, or this time that we've had together, pull out those pieces that really resonate with you and go back to your white community, especially to those in positions of power, and further the conversation that it can translate into action. Because what I find usually is that whites want to find out how to relate to us, and that's fine. You can do both. But usually the initial, there's an avoidance I have found, and maybe fear, what have you, is to not challenge your own whiteness within your own white community. And that we need that. To me, that's where the allies really are, is to do that. So if you are doing that, continue to do that. If you haven't done that, I would start doing it. And I mean like CEOs, pastors, board members, what are we doing? What's our agenda? If there aren't any, then create the agendas. And then when you do bring in people of color, you find that you're underrepresented in those areas, where can do the work to recruit us for positions of power. Hope that was helpful.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Is someone else talking? I hear you guys have provided a lot of resources. Great. Please, that's the other thing too. Read. I read a lot, not just because I'm an educator, but I like to be knowledgeable. So, sometimes I'm speaking right now to my African American audience too. I respect cable and Netflix and all these other things, but read and listen to some of these documentaries that talk about who we are, and have your family, sit down with your family and have conversations. Put the cell phones down, put the YouTube down. Well, unless you're watching to some people of color speak truth to power. Otherwise, when are we going to have our knowledge base the way it needs to be so we can feel confident?
Unfortunately, it seems like a lot of the TV programs are really putting a lot of Black characters in the show that are placed as criminals in the program. And I worry that a lot of us kind of develop this stereotype of a little bit of fear because of the TV programs that, like Chicago PD, for example, or shows like that. And it bothers me to see all of the Black and brown characters, and these are played by actors, and it just kind of gives a very bad impression of what's really going on. That bothers me.
Thank you, Catherine, for sharing. I will add to what you're saying. Remember back to the power structure that I just talked about. People that are in these positions that own these networks and own what they're going to put on TV, to me, that's systematic racism and the hegemonic power. That those are oftentimes, especially if they're in stereotypical roles, are to put us in that light. However, we want to recognize that it's okay to have an African American as a police officer or having some of these roles, but we want to recognize the larger macro issues that we've been conditioned to have biases and see us that way. So whether it's on TV or out in your communities, it's happening. So just being aware that we need jobs in the television industry too, but I think that we need to start owning our own voices and our own production companies on how we're going to be represented. And again, we're seeing some of these things change because, for example, somebody get fired and then you'll see a person of color now in a position of leadership on TV. So we're slowly working towards it, but this work, Catherine, starts with us. So we need to individually and institutionally work on this. And the individual part is looking at our own biases. Because, I mean, if we know this, but then we go into our communities and there's nobody that look like us, when we do see them, oh my goodness, there's a person of color, let me cross the street. Then we're behavioral, we already have it internalized. So to me, that we need to unpack that and work on that within ourselves so we don't teach our kids and people to go to school and all these different things. So thank you though, I appreciate that comment.
I'm aware of it, so I'm aware of it, so I don't approach things that way consciously. But I know that there is still an element of fear that comes up sometimes.
Because of the implicit bias. So you said consciously, but I'm talking about the unconsciously. So, you know, and there's plenty of that on the internet, but so I won't get into all these details, but we're unconsciously, I'm not just saying whites have implicit bias, all of us do. We're all taught to, oh my goodness, people of color might cross the street when they see a person of color, because we're all conditioned to be fearful of people of color. So that's what I'm saying. These are some serious issues. I also want to encourage, because of time, some others to speak as well, if you don't mind. I want to hear some more diverse voices. So I like some people of color to speak up as well. And I don't mean to assert you can't speak anymore, Catherine. Please have your closing remarks. I just want to, I can be pretty assertive, yeah. I want to hear more voices before we leave, that's all.
I just want to say thank you for a very powerful and educative and enlightening and very practical and relevant presentation. I mean, I think you gave us information that some of us live, but I think it was helpful. If you could just, and I hope I'm not taking it, but talk a little bit about what's about to happen with our Supreme Court, how that could impact the power structure and race in this country moving forward.
So let me ask you, Reginald, what angle are you coming from with that question? I'd like to know.
Well, when we're talking about diversity, equality, and power structure, you know, race, talk about how the changes through legislation, you know, through in this country, it can really take us back. Which, if the decisions that are made at the Supreme Court is supposed to be supreme, they're reduced to politics and ideology. You know, all these conversations we have now can be totally erased through the laws of the land. So if you could just enlighten us on that.
Sure. So thank you so much, Reginald. Sometimes I'm a little cautious on some topics, but that I speak on, but this is a very powerful one. So we might as well bring it right to the table as well. So, you know, first of all, I want to give my condolences, and, you know, we have empathy for Justice Ginsburg. Forgive me, I can't get her name out right now. But she's done some awesome work, and we value that. But now we're talking about a vacancy of one of the highest positions for justice. And we really are at a crossroads, because we are already divided politically in this country as it is, racially, and now we have this opportunity to see who's going to fill that vacancy. And so part of the concerns when it comes to systematic racism, will some of these laws that have impact, like voting rights, for example, voter suppression is a real thing. People can say that it's not, but it is. When you have the inequities with transportation to sites, when sites are open and closed, access to computers to do mail by vote. These are things that a lot of times white Europeans take for granted. And so we're looking at how we're going to get to the polls. And so when those things are built into the system, you must have a certain ID and all these things. Those are part of that systematic racism. So I can go on and on about that, but the voting rights is huge. And even I'm going to say too, you know, these EEOC laws, I'm going to be honest with you. I've had a lot of experiences. So with local government, I worked, and so to me, when we go to those EEOC offices in our city or state governments, and to me, proving racial discrimination is one of the hardest ones to prove. The cases for ableism, or excuse me, disability or gender are easier to prove. Why is it so hard when we say, well, we discriminated via race, the cases are overturned over and over. So Reginald, you see, I already have a lot to say. So I just gave 3 laws that I think that were pertinent to this conversation on systematic racism. So I get on my knees and pray, and we need everybody to me to get on their knees and pray, because who's coming next? And if they look like me or they don't look like me, where's your mindset? Do you have the mindset to say, I'm done with this systematic racism? So
I agree, and I'm like, you can go on and on. We're really at a crossroads in this country, and you know, I'm gonna say this, and I'll be through. It's gonna take more than just African Americans and minorities to change this country. It's a lot of people that have been silent. There's a lot of people that have benefited and are too comfortable now. But an unhealthy society for some is unhealthy for everybody. And I think that who feels that Supreme Court, this country could see some changes that we read about in history that'll be prevalent, obvious, and legal moving forward. So I agree, it's time, you know, we really need to really get active and speak to power. People who know people in power need to speak to them.
See, yeah, that's what, thank you so much. Anyone else? This is great. And then you guys tell me when we have to stop. So, because I love to talk, and I could talk with you guys for another, but we're not gonna be here that long. It's Saturday, I got to do my grocery shopping. I have to wash my hair. I mean, hey, no, but who else wants to say something, who said, I really want to say something, or I'm afraid to say something?
Dr. Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to thank you, because this has been very enlightening, and this is what we need, more conversations to take place. And I worked in corporate America for years. I'll never forget when I was really getting into my career. I'm a computer science major, and I used to go and teach courses throughout the corporation to different locations.
Yes.
And I didn't know everybody personally, but a lot of people were my customers who I would go teach.
Okay.
One time I had to go to New Orleans and teach a class of engineers. And I walked in the door, and this guy told me, he said, you at the wrong place. I said, what do you mean I'm in the wrong place? Is this such and such class? And he said, yes, it is. I said, okay, I'm in the right place, and I'm the instructor for this class. And the next question he asked me was, well, what college did you go to?
Yeah.
I said, I didn't go to college. And he looked at me and he said, you gonna teach this class? I said, yeah, but I didn't go to college. And you know, it was just assumed.
Yes.
You're not qualified to teach this class. And so one of my customers was in the class, and he told him, he said, you haven't even met her, but let me tell you, I was on the deadline, and she did all the work for me to get everything through, and I didn't have one problem. So you need to be quiet. But, you know, until people start speaking up, it's going to be a problem.
That's right. Deborah, that was powerful. Oh my goodness. See, this is what I'm talking about. I want to hear these conversations because this is the reality. And this, I put in there the Inscription of Intelligence. We are intelligent. Excuse me? That's a whole nother presentation on the assets and the prosperousness of African-American people. We don't have time for that. So Deborah, I applaud you for sharing
So
that.
another session for that, Dr. Jackson.
Yeah, but I just want to say, Deborah, thank you, because that means something to me, for me to hear that. That means something. And I'm sorry that you experienced that.
It was okay, but you know, I use that as an example to my grandkids, and I tell them, no one can ever take your education away from you. It's important.
And it's not okay, Deborah. I'm sorry. Part of what for me, part of my message is it's not okay. And that's what I want to salute to all people. But again, I'm African American, so sometimes my messages might be really pointed to us because I'm trying to get my African American people's minds right now. It's not okay. So we want to start pausing more and think about how these things are affected us mental health wise. It's not okay. You internalize that, Deborah, and I don't even know how long ago that was. That's affecting you as a Black, I'm assuming you're a Black woman by your.
I am.
Okay, well then there you go. So that impacts you mentally and spiritually and physically. So no, it's not okay. And that's part of what we need to say. That's not okay, sir. I don't appreciate being stereotyped based on my race and you assuming that I'm not qualified to teach this course. See, that's the kind of stuff we're gonna have to start saying. So I'm telling you all, that's what you want to know what you need to do. That's the kind of stuff you're gonna need to do. And that's uncomfortable, but that's raising up and being who God has called you to be. You're a human being that matters. And your grandkids gonna see that and know how it's modeled.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Woo. Can we do like a collective community deep breath on that note?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
I don't even realize how much I hold my breath. Because racism is sucking the life out of all of us. No matter who we look like, it's stealing from us. So Dr. Jackson, thank you for your words, for your discernment, and for really just dedicating your resources, your talent, your spirit, and your life to this work and sharing it with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. It was an honor.
All right, so Kashayla, I believe that this was the last stop on the Freedom Tour this week.
Yes.
Thank you. This has been a great ride.
Yes, this is the part of the trip where we stretch. We're like, ooh, we made it. We stretch our legs out. We've been seated for a long time on the bus. Dr. Jackson, you are welcome to, we're just going to take 2 minutes to close out. So you're welcome to, if you need to head out, feel free, but we invite you to stay if you are able. As shared earlier this week, this was the official launch of our Equity Innovation Center for the YMCA of Greater Houston. It's a different kind of ribbon cutting than we normally would have had when we were in a physical space, but it was incredibly powerful, and it was powerful because of the community that showed up this week, for our facilitators and our guest speakers and the organizations that have signed on to join us as collaborators with the Equity Innovation Center. If you've heard that term and you're not sure what it means, I'm gonna share the link to our new webpage in the chat. It will also be shared out via email. But our Equity Innovation Center is more than a physical space. While it will take place at the Tullops and Downtown Family YMCA next year in person, it is a space for us to convene as individuals in the community who want to learn together, to advocate, to lead, and to change the course of our collective future, to advance racial equity, to dismantle the systems that have oppressed so many of our people for far too long. And so on behalf of our organization, on behalf of the Equity Innovation Center, just want to thank you all again for joining us this week. this is the start. And this is a journey. And we are honored to do that alongside you. Thank you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, Sherry. Thank you everyone for attending. We are all free to exit safely out of the Freedom Tour bus.